wrong, so don't ever, whatever. But basically that's what they're saying. So there's going to be more and more of this as there's competition, so people can choose to pay. So you're not going to, if you think you can go out not paying for a bag, you're not going to, because it's cheaper and there's less time. So then you squish stuff into those overhead lockers, don't you? And it's so goddamn annoying for other people.
Stephen?
Yes, I'm just thinking guiltily of when
Are you a locker squisher?
No, travelling on business, you don't have to try and say for that, but it's just the time and the risk of losing stuff that you sometimes try and travel entirely without.
Actually, that is a good point. There's nothing worse than waiting as the belt goes round and round and round and your suitcase doesn't appear.
You can't always travel on business, though. You can't travel on business between Auckland and Wellington with that. You have still got to use the overhead lockers, don't you?
Yes, I mean, that's easy. When you are on business, it's easy because you just got to... Well, I'm amazed at how much luggage many quite small women carry.
Well, you know, they've got a lot of things. They've got to put the kitchen sink in their handbag, so you've got to have a big handbag.
Never leaves them as well. But the reason I was feeling a little guilty was that those luggage constraints, I ended up being caught in Honolulu when I was a student and wore my ski boots onto the plane to get past the weight limit.
That would have been a comfortable flight, wouldn't it? Look, no, that gets us onto another thing then. So you took them off, didn't you, and had bare feet on a flight?
Absolutely.
Which is the most disgusting thing ever. It's worse than dancing with dead bodies.
Is it?
Well, no, it's not, but it's kind of up there on an ooh level.
We have asked this before as a quick question, and I'm not saying we don't get a straight answer, but we get an answer seemingly at odds with the evidence provided by our eyes when we see someone lug a huge thing on board, or what we think looks like a huge thing. And when you see people staggering down the aisle with what looks like a suitcase, do you think that's a suitcase?
I do, and when they can't actually put it up and down in the overhead lockers, you kind of think, you want to help them because I hope I'm a nice person, so I want to help them. But yeah, I do think airlines need to get tougher at it.
In an Australian newspaper, there is a defence of voluminous on-board luggage by a woman who gets cold on board and she has to have a change of clothes with her on the plane in case her checked-in luggage is lost.
Why is she so different to anyone else? If you get cold, wear a jersey. They don't take up that much room.
Well, because it's her getting cold.
Yeah, well, wear a jersey. I have no sympathy.
It's like the advice your mother gave you.
It is.
When she wouldn't let you put the heater on.
I'm on your side, Alan, in all theory, and just a bit concerned my practice doesn't quite live up to it.
I know, you're feeling a bit guilty about this, aren't you?
Yeah.
Anyone that's on a plane with Stephen in the next week, please look at his luggage allowance and report back.
It sounded squishy.
It did.
Part of the USA opioid crisis, says Kirk, is their health system. Therapy for pain is expensive and often difficult to get past insurers. It is easy and cheap to prescribe opiates. This has been a major factor. That is interesting, isn't it?
It's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought of it, but yeah, really good point.
And I went to the doctors today. I was asked to fill out what medicines, painkillers, vitamins I'd had in the past 4 weeks, says another texter. I said none, and the doctor was surprised. Is this no longer normal? Interesting comments about all that, and great comments today from our panellists too. Thank you both. Stephen Franks has been on. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Thanks, Alan.
And Alan Reid. Thanks for your company, Alan. Nice to see you. And we are back with the panel tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. And John Campbell as along shortly with Checkpoints.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint. Lovely to have you with us. Tonight, why national standards look set to be scrapped. The new government says a manned re-entry to Pike could happen by next April. The new Minister for Children, Tracy Martin, tells us she has no plans yet to rename the Ministry for Vulnerable Children. And McDonald's restaurant live streams CCTV footage from its 24-hour drive-through to the police station. The SPCA says 9 months imprisonment for a man who struck a dog 3 times on the head with a hammer is not long enough, and more needs to be done to rehabilitate offenders. And the runner who ditched his shoes to run the last 24K of yesterday's Auckland Marathon barefoot. All of that and what is happening in Washington coming up on Checkpoint. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The new government is likely to scrap current plans to send a robot into the Pike River mine as it presses ahead with manned re-entry. The previous National-led government had said getting people into the mine was too dangerous, but the new minister responsible for re-entry, Andrew Little, says it's entirely possible. The remains of 29 men killed almost 7 years ago are still in the mine. Solid Energy, which owns Pike River, is currently working on sending in a remote-controlled vehicle, which is on track to be sent in by Christmas. But Mr Little says he's discovered the robot is only a prototype and is uncomfortable with how experimental the project is.
Given how long this has been going on for, given the demands of the families, I'm not sure they should be the subject of an experiment anymore. I think they deserve a better project, if you like, and greater certainty than I think what is being offered.
Andrew Little says he'll make a final decision by the end of this week whether to scrap the robot entry. 3 intellectually disabled men who claimed they had been mistreated while held in health board care have lost their High Court bid for compensation. One of them had been detained since 1999, another since 2002, and the third was held between 2001 and 2014. Here's our court reporter, Anne-Marie May.
The 3 men, whose names are suppressed, had been seeking up to $1.4 million. Their lawyer, Tony Ellis, told the High Court the men had been put on a shelf and forgotten about and been subject to unnecessary restraints, unnecessary medication and unreasonable solitary confinement. However, in a decision released today, the High Court has ruled there was no evidence that restraint and seclusion was used in circumstances other than where the men presented an immediate risk of harm to themselves or other patients or staff. It has also ruled the men's detention did not discriminate against them on the grounds of their intellectual disability. This is Anne-Marie May.
The Christchurch police are being accused of exposing New Zealanders to a new level of surveillance. Live CCTV pictures from the Sydenham branch of McDonald's are being direct streamed to the police control centre 24 hours a day. The police say a number of local businesses share footage with them, and the purpose is to make the community feel safe. But the Council for Civil Liberties says it's disturbing that the footage is being sent to police directly. A spokesperson, Thomas Beagle, says society may not want everything to be monitored by the police.
I guess I see there's a big difference between something unfortunate happens and that footage is then made available to the police and actually just streaming all footage there where it can be used for things like facial recognition. Of course, it can be used for automated number plate recognition as well. It just seems a whole new level of surveillance.
That's Thomas Beagle of the Council for Civil Liberties. School teachers and principals say they will keep using the national standards in reading, writing and maths until they are officially told to stop. The new government is expected to abolish the standards which have been compulsory since 2010. The end of the national standards is not yet official, but teachers and principals told RNZ News they're looking forward to their demise. They say the system is too narrowly focused and has not helped raise achievement among children from Māori, Pacifica and low-income families. The Crown has been told, or has told a court, that a baby who was allegedly killed by her babysitter suffered severe head injuries before she died. 20-year-old Shail Arpashna Sami is accused of murdering 1-year-old Alaya Ashlyn Chand close to 3 years ago. Her trial began this morning at the High Court in Christchurch. The Crown prosecutor, Mark Zarifa, told the court the baby suffered serious injuries that were inconsistent with the defendant's claim that the baby fell from a couch.
Alia's severe head injuries, which included 2 skull fractures, subdural hemorrhaging, that's bleeding within the head, and also multiple hemorrhages to the retina, that's the retina of the eyes, both eyes, were inconsistent with a fall from the couch.
The Crown prosecutor there, Mark Zarifa. Fairfax newspapers will be moving to tabloid size from the middle of next year. RNZ News understands staff have been told all daily newspapers will become compact in a move to make them easier to use and more visually appealing. The newspapers affected will include the Manawatu Standard, the Taranaki Daily News, the Press and the Dominion Post. Fairfax will plan the move over the next 2 months and working with advertisers on design. It's 5 minutes past 5. On to sport now. The first 5 Bowden Barrett is in line to be named All Blacks captain for the first time when the side played the Barbarians in their Northern Hemisphere tour opener in London on Sunday morning.
With regular skipper Karen Reid having an extra week off, coach Steve Hansen says Barrett, the vice-captain, will lead the side during this week's build-up. Hansen hasn't confirmed whether Barrett will play in the tour opener, but maintains the side is preparing for the game as if it were a test. Lewis Hamilton has become Britain's first four-time Formula One world champion after fighting back from last place following an opening lap collision with arch-rival Sebastian Vettel at the Mexican Grand Prix. Hamilton finished ninth, but it was enough to cement the championship title with 2 races remaining. Dutchman Max Verstappen won the race, but New Zealand's Brendan Hartley's second Grand Prix went up in smoke. Starting from 17th on the grid, Hartley in his Toro Rosso surged to 11th, but was forced off the track with engine problems on the 32nd lap.
Somebody's smoking in the last 3 corners.
And it is the Toro Rosso of Brendan Hartley.
Mate, I'm losing a lot of power.
Stop the car, Brendan. Stop the car in a safe place. Stop the car.
Oh dear, and there's flames coming from the back of Brendan Hartley's motor.
The penultimate Grand Prix of the season is at Sao Paulo in Brazil in 2 weeks. And the Taranaki rider Michael Torkler has won a bunch sprint finish to claim the first stage of cycling's Tour of Southland. That is the news.
Free trade with Russia.
Mr Peters has made it very clear that under the right circumstances that he is a supporter of trade agreements.
Pushing the city limits.
The area that we're looking to develop is Hairata, north and northwest up into Karaka. The beauty of the land is good soil but not highly productive soil.
Excitement and despair for the Black Caps in India.
All in all, I think it was a great effort from the Kiwis, irrespective of the outcome of the match and the series.
At the crease each morning from 6 till 9, Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner, Morning Report.
Then on 9 to noon, a plea by providers of international private tertiary education for New Zealand not to turn its back on foreign students. And after 10, the Australian adventurer Michael Smith, who in 2015 became the first person to fly solo around the world in a tiny amphibious plane. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now we have Met Service short forecast taking us through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday. For Northland to Waitomo, that includes Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumarunui. Cloudy periods, isolated showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from a few showers, mainly about the ranges. Taranaki and Taihape through to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough, Nelson and Buller. Scattered showers, mainly about the ranges during the afternoons and evenings. Some heavy, possibly thundery. Canterbury and Otago, fine apart from areas of low cloud morning and evening, especially about the coast, and isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. Thunderstorms are possible about North Canterbury tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening. Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, patchy drizzle. That should clear up in the morning and then become fine apart from isolated showers about Westland. Southland, mostly fine, isolated showers inland tomorrow. Fine at the Chathams. It's 8 minutes past 5.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul Brennan. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. Delighted to have your company. Lots happening tonight. Coming up, Tracy Martin, who is, of course, the new Minister for Children and for Seniors, the bookends of life, she says. She's going to join us. We've just got a decision out of the Court of Appeal, which is absolutely fascinating. I think we're making calls on this, but the Court of Appeal has released a judgment allowing a group of earthquake insurance claimants, this is in Christchurch of course, the Southern Response Unresolved Claims Group, to bring a representative proceeding against their insurer. Southern Response, more on them in a sec. A representative proceeding is like a class action in other jurisdictions, I'm reading this from the Court of Appeal, and allows multiple claimants to be represented by one or more representative plaintiffs when they have similar claims. Now, they've always insisted their claims were similar. Southern Response had sought to have representative action barred primarily on the grounds that the different claims by the individuals in the group were not sufficiently similar to be dealt with in this way. The Court of Appeal has rejected this argument, this finding out this afternoon. Why is this interesting? Well, one, precedent. It's a fascinating precedent because increasingly people in these circumstances will look to take class actions. But also, of course, Southern Response handles claims relating to the Canterbury earthquakes made under AMI. AMI simply didn't have enough money to pay out. The government took over. So essentially, this is the government or a branch of it losing in the appeal court. We're trying desperately to find people who are prepared to discuss this with us, and we will have more as the program goes on. 5:09, the days where children are ranked below, at or above the national standards appear numbered after new Education Minister Chris Hipkins signalled he plans to ditch the controversial reporting system. Now, national standards were introduced in 2010 despite widespread opposition from teacher unions. There's been ongoing concern about the standards ever since, and it's likely under the new government that this year's end of school reports will be the last where children are marked against national standards in reading, writing and maths. School principals told Checkpoint they will be glad to see the back of the standards, but will keep using them until told otherwise. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
When the national standards were introduced, the national-led government said they would ensure clearer reporting to parents. But Wellington parent Caroline Spate-Moore says she hasn't found the standards to be much use in reports for her 3 children, and she won't miss them.
It's much more important to us to go and have a conversation with the teacher, and then we find out what is really going on, because meeting the national standards, you can drive a bus through the national standards. They're so broad. A kid can be just meeting or right at the top, and you've got no information to understand where they're actually at.
Across town, teachers in this school staff room are very happy that the end of the standards is in sight.
It's a relief, I would say.
I think it's a wonderful thing.
Sometimes there are some parents who tend to focus on, is my child at or is my child above, and we can move beyond that and get into some more interesting, helpful territory.
There's definitely more stress on the core subjects, reading, writing, maths, and a lot of the other subjects get pushed aside.
While most teachers seem to be looking forward to dropping the national standards, Lorraine Kerr from the School Trustees Association says some trustees might need to be convinced that the change is a good idea.
There are probably some board members who don't know anything else. If you're a new board member, that's all you know is national standards. So maybe we have to, as an organisation, do some work around that.
Michael Johnston from Victoria University advised the government on the standards and helped develop a computer tool to help teachers use them. He says there are upsides and downsides to abolishing the standards.
In terms of what will be lost, I guess a national lens on literacy and numeracy. If we're going to have all schools deciding what to do in their own right, we could have a fairly patchy system if we're not careful. On the upside, there's been a lot of difficulty getting the national standards consistent anyway.
Michael Johnston says dropping the standards will also allay some people's fears about the impact of league tables that compare schools' results. Hawke's Bay Principal Perry Rush was at the forefront of opposition to the standards. He says principals and teachers are telling him they're excited.
What national standards did to learning was reduce the capacity for teachers to be creative and to value learning outside of the core curriculum. And we see a lot of excitement that teachers are now able to get back to having broad and open and creative curriculum. And that's a great thing.
Perry Rush admits some good has come from the standards. He says they help teachers think harder about how to measure and report children's progress. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
Parents and teachers and students, if you're so inclined, we would love your feedback on this. Please text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We're already getting feedback on it and we'll bring it to you throughout the program. 30 minutes past 5. Thank you for being with us. Tears flowed as a babysitter saw the bruised, lifeless body of a 1-year-old baby who died in her care as her murder trial began in Christchurch today. Shail Apashanasamy is accused of killing Alaya Ashlyn Chand in January 2015 at her home. The Crown says Ms Samy recklessly murdered the 1-year-old, but the defence says it was a tragic accident. Logan Church was at the High Court in Christchurch.
Shail Samy had been Alaya's babysitter for almost 2 months, before one night when everything went wrong. Ms Samy, who was 18 and pregnant at the time, left Alaya on a couch in her living room whilst she prepared dinner. As she did most nights, Alaya was in her care. She told police at the time she heard a thud and saw Alaya had fallen off the couch and was injured. But Crown Prosecutor Mark Zarifa says the baby suffered injuries that were too severe for Ms Samy's explanation.
Alia's severe head injuries, which included 2 skull fractures, subdural hemorrhaging, that's bleeding within the head, and also multiple hemorrhages to the retina, that's the retina of the eyes, both eyes, were inconsistent with a fall from the couch.
But defence lawyer Jonathan Eaton told the court the death was a tragic accident.
She suffered some sort of fall within the house, rare to die from
those types of accidents, but all the experts will agree it can happen. She'd suffered an accident the day before she died. It was an unwitnessed accident, but obviously involved her falling from the furniture.
Mr Eason said the defendants ran outside her Worcester Street flat trying to find help when she saw the baby was injured. A neighbour raced the pair in his car to Christchurch Hospital, where an off-duty nurse saw them arrive and rushed Elia into the emergency department. She was taken into the intensive care unit and put on life support, but never regained consciousness. Mr Zarifa says Ms Sami recklessly murdered the baby.
A fall from the couch, whatever position Alia might have been in such a fall, is at odds with the bruising to her face, ear, right ear. The Crown says they were inflicted in a moment of anger or frustration, and the Crown says in relation to the murder charge that it's a reckless killing. There's no allegation of any intentional killing.
Ms Sami cried as a picture of Elia's bruised, lifeless face was shown to the jury. Elia's father, Dev Chand, told the court through a translator that although Elia was not yet able to walk, she was able to pull herself up. Jonathan Eaton says no one witnessed the baby falling and there was no crime committed.
Exactly what happened, as the Crown say, we will never know. But I want to make it very clear from the outset, there was no crime committed here. There was no murder, there was no manslaughter, there was no assault. It was an accident. Full stop. No criminal act.
Mr Eaton says the defence's case relied on the opinion of experts who were not at the scene. The opening day of the trial was cut short after a juror had to go home sick, but testimony from Dev Chand is expected to continue tomorrow. The trial before Justice Dunningham is expected to take 2 weeks. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Cabinet meets tomorrow for only the second time since the government was formed, and there at the Cabinet table will be Tracy Martin of New Zealand First, a woman who backed the party's campaign for a binding referendum on repealing what was called the anti-smacking legislation, will be the Minister for Children. She's also the Minister for Seniors. She told me she likes having what she calls the bookends of life. She thinks the portfolios complement each other. But we start with children. What was SIFS? Became the Ministry for Vulnerable Children, Oranga Tamariki, reports it's been decided the word vulnerable is to go. Has that been decided?
It hasn't actually. It's really interesting. I've made no announcements at all. Since in the 4 days that I've been the Minister, I've made no announcements. So that's a media release. A media report. I haven't put out any releases as such.
Do you think it will go?
I think it was a mistake in the first instance with the First Minister, with Antoli. There was a lot of advice to say, let's not stigmatise these young people in that way. And also there was a lot of conversation that all children are vulnerable at some stage of their lives. But it's not a decision I make on my own. So now being a member of a cabinet, I'd have to go and have that conversation with others, I think.
And $17 million was spent on that rebranding exercise, wasn't it?
Yes, I did actually look at the numbers that the Herald put forward, and if I get right back down to it, I think it was $46,000 was what was probably letterhead and bits and pieces, and $6,000 on signage. So I can appreciate that there's a lot of money in there. I would say this: if somebody makes a mistake, should we just not undo it because it might cost us some money? That would be my first comment.
Which brings us rather nicely to the 2007 amendment to Section 59 of the Crimes Act, which is always called as a shorthand the anti-smacking bill. Are you still in favour of a referendum on repealing that?
Some of the policies that we took into negotiations did not survive negotiations, and that was one of the policies that did not survive the negotiations, a referendum on Section 59.
I was reading an interview that you did alongside Sue Bradford on Q&A, TVNZ in June, and you talked, and you used this phrase repeatedly, of the chilling effect on parents of this legislation, and you described feeling a chilling effect yourself. Had you been smacking your children prior to that?
Yes, yes. Okay. Well, I mean, a smack on the leg, a smack on the hand, I absolutely had, yes.
Under what circumstances? What did they do to warrant a smack on the leg, a smack on the hand?
Well, normally it was when one of my children would decide that they weren't going to listen to me. They weren't going to follow my instructions. And so it was a standoff between myself and a child. I'd got to the place where I had explained myself for a number of minutes, and now we were in a situation when it was, you need to do as you are told. And if the answer was still no, then it was a smack on the leg and go to your room, and then we'll talk about it again once you figure out that, you know, I'm the parent and you're the child.
So after the amendment to Section 59, did you stop doing that?
Actually, that was really interesting. My children came home to inform me, particularly my oldest son, I think he was 12 at the time. He came home to tell me that this legislation had changed and that I could no longer smack the kids. And I said, you're absolutely right, but I need you to understand that there's no law that says I have to buy you a Christmas present. So I think we need to have a conversation about how this relationship's going to work.
And so did you smack the kids again after that?
My children were somewhat older by that stage. I think my youngest was about 8, and no.
How do we get this right? How do we protect our children as well as they deserve?
And I think focusing on Article 59, whether it be from my perspective or Sue Bradford's perspective, has not worked. So, like, you know, I'm prepared. That policy did not survive negotiations. So let's move on.
And you have no, sorry to interrupt, because this is a really good conversation and I do want to hear about the big picture stuff. But you have no personal regrets about it not surviving the negotiations? You have no personal regrets?
No.
You're happy to move on? Because if we go back to 2014, this was a very strong part of the New Zealand First platform. In fact, you wouldn't go into coalition with a party that wasn't prepared to have a referendum on repealing Section 59.
That's right. But the world has moved on. We've moved on. If I can find a way with our coalition partners to improve that legislation to make it clearer in law, then we will do that.
Okay.
But with regard to the referendum on Section 59, that did not survive negotiations.
Can we move on then? And sorry, you were trying to before and I interrupted, so it's 100% my fault. Can we move on to how do we get it right? How do we look after our children as well as I know you and everyone listening would hope we could?
Well, remembering that I've been a minister for 4 days, so I spent the whole of the weekend reading the written briefings, but I'm yet to have an oral briefing from Oranga Tamariki. I think that this is a step in the right direction, setting up a separate agency. I don't think anybody would say that what we had been doing before with regard to SIFs was working. Now, that's not necessarily a criticism of the people on the front line. I think there's some resourcing issues, there's some caseload issues, and those are things that we very quickly need to sit down, address, keep marching forward, and if it's more resourcing, then I need to go into bat for more resourcing.
What do you think you can achieve personally as a minister in a portfolio about which there are so many opinions and through which there have been so many changes?
Well, I think what I hope to bring to it is that as a lens, an interesting lens that not many, I mean, I'm a Pākehā New Zealander, so I'm a New Zealander of European descent, you know, 6th generation New Zealander, but my mother was whāngai into Māoridom. So what I hope to bring is an understanding across both European and the Māori world and a way that we can bring those together. I don't think there has been enough conversation with say the Māori Women's Welfare League and other Māori organisations when 60% of the children in care are Māori children, around about that number, in constructive ways that we can try prevention, much greater prevention, apart from just looking after our children in a better way.
Let's look at the other end of life, and that is our seniors. Of course, people are living for longer. There are increasing financial pressures on people, particularly in our larger cities, particularly in Auckland where the cost of living is so high. How do you get that portfolio right when, as a percentage of the population, there are more and more older people than ever before?
Yeah. So that's, I mean, it's, again, minister for 4 days. But I think what we need to address, we need to have recognition. One of the reasons why I'm pleased that I've got both ends of the spectrum is there have been players in politics that have tried to set the younger demographic up against the older demographic. And what I hope to do is to do some bridging in that place. We have older people who are under stress, and we need to look at the rates rebates level and other sort of levels for some of our older citizens. We need to have incorporated into the housing conversation what used to be called council flats, pensioners housing, and so on and so forth. So I want to make sure that I keep those conversations at the cabinet table with all the decisions that are being made in housing, that are being made around social support, etc., etc. The other thing we've got is we did actually, through the coalition, it wasn't the full policy that we campaigned on, but we did get 1 free doctor's visit a year and 1 free eye check a year for super gold card holders. We did get a commitment to pursue the super gold card as a smart card, which would bring more services and more discounts with it. So we hope to just extend and continue to expand on what we've tried to build since 2005.
You've got a big job, haven't you?
I have actually.
Associate Minister of Education, Minister of Internal Affairs.
Yeah.
Are you excited about it as you set out on this extraordinary journey?
I wouldn't say that I'm excited at this moment. I'm very, very aware of the responsibility that I have just and the rest of the people in Cabinet and outside of Cabinet have taken on. So excitement, I don't think, is the word. It is actually just a real commitment to get across my portfolios as fast as possible, to work as hard as I can to make a positive change and positive outcome for those affected by my portfolio areas.
2 final questions, and look, it's my fault that this interview's gone so long. Can you make your answers quick? Answer number 1, what is your relationship with Jacinda Ardern? I hear on the grapevine you get along famously.
I get along famously with most people. I'm a nice person.
Right, good answer. And question number 2, you were asked on the day that New Zealand first made its decision but hadn't yet announced it if you thought you had picked the right coalition partner, and you said, God, I hope so.
Yeah, which at that time we hadn't picked yet, but I truly believe so. I believe we've made the right choice for New Zealand, and now we have to make it work.
Tracy Martin, who is the Minister for Children and the Minister for Seniors, 26 minutes past 5. Let's stay with Cabinet. A project to send a robot into Pike River is likely to be scrapped as the new government looks for ways to send in people instead. Andrew Little, the new minister responsible for re-entry, says he's read some comprehensive reports and he believes manned entry can happen. He says he'll shift the resources to make sure it can be achieved. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
It's been nearly 7 years since an explosion ripped through the Pike River mine, killing 29 men.
Well, it'll never be over until, we get that closure.
Anna Osborne, who lost her husband Milton in the disaster, says it's been exhausting fighting the previous national government, which maintained that a manned mine entry would be too dangerous.
We've just got so many unanswered questions, and is it too hard to give the families the truth?
But now, under Labour and the new minister, Andrew Little, things will change.
Of course, there are risks involved, but manned re-entry is possible.
Giving Anna Osborne hope she'll finally get some answers.
It's actually nice to be on the same side as the government now, and we can make huge progress and, put smiles on our faces now.
Not only is Andrew Little hoping to get manned entry by next April, but it's likely he will get rid of current plans to send in a robot. Solid Energy, which owns Pike River, negotiated with the previous government to work on entering the mine using a remote-controlled vehicle, which would be sent in by Christmas. It says it will continue to do that unless directed otherwise by the Labour-led government. Andrew Little is signalling that could happen in the next week.
I'm surprised to learn that the unmanned re-entry project is actually about developing some technology that hasn't been developed or tried before. Given how long this has been going on for, given the demands of the families, I'm not sure they should be the subject of an experiment anymore. I think they deserve a better project, if you like, and greater certainty than I think what is being offered.
He says all the work done up until this point will need to be revised.
And it is about, for the families, I think, giving them some real certainty that the promise made to them that everything that could be done would be done to try to seek to recover whatever remains could be recovered in the drift. I'm not convinced that the work that has happened to date is getting us anywhere near that.
Anna Osborne is pleased to hear all resources will now be channelled into getting people into the mine.
We've had quite a few robot attempts down the drift already and they've all failed miserably, so let's put the money into actually doing a manned re-entry into the drift rather than using more resources on a robot that can't actually retrieve anything. All they can do is take images.
However, the former minister in charge of Pike River, Nick Smith, says it would be beneficial to follow through with the current plans.
Even if the new government wants to try and proceed with manned entry, then getting extra information from the latest technology would seem a sensible thing still to do, particularly given the amount of public money that has already gone into developing the plans.
Andrew Little says he will receive more briefings on existing risk assessment reports this week, as well as talk to the families before making a final decision on whether to continue with Solid Energy's robot plan. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
Kia ora, everyone. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up on the program, the High Court rules a class action by Southern Response policy holders can go ahead. This is a really interesting decision. In fact, it's the Court of Appeal. And the SPCA says 9 months imprisonment for a man who struck a dog 3 times on the head with a hammer is not long enough. McDonald's restaurant live streams CCTV footage from its 24-hour drive-through to a police station. And we talked to a runner who ditched his shoes about halfway through the marathon in Auckland yesterday. Why and how are his feet? All of that, and of course, what is going to happen tomorrow in Washington? What an extraordinary day, that indictment. But before all of it, with the time, actually, Paul Brennan at 5:30, here are the 5:30 headlines.
Right on time. Thank you, John. In our headlines, plans to send a robot into the Pike River mine are expected to be scrapped by the government as it presses ahead with manned re-entry. The previous National-led government had said getting people into the mine was too dangerous, but the new minister responsible for re-entry, Andrew Little, says it is entirely possible. Mr. Little says he's discovered the robot is only a prototype and he's uncomfortable with the experimental nature of the project. The Christchurch police are being accused of exposing New Zealanders to a new level of surveillance. Live CCTV pictures from the Sydenham branch of McDonald's are being direct streamed to the police control centre 24 hours a day. The Council for Civil Liberties says it's disturbing that the footage is being sent to police directly, but the police say it's making the community feel safe. A security guard transporting cash to his van has been robbed at gunpoint in Auckland. The police say the robbery in Glenmore Place, Glen Eden, took place just before 3 this afternoon. They say a man carrying a gun approached the guard and demanded cash before fleeing with an undisclosed amount. The National Party leader, Bill English, won't be commenting on the police decision not to charge former MP Todd Barclay over allegations he secretly recorded a staff member. The re-investigation was launched in June after new information came to light, but police chiefs say there is still insufficient evidence to prosecute. A spokesman for Mr English says it's a matter for the police and the former Prime Minister has nothing further to add. And Fairfax newspapers will be moving to tabloid size from the middle of next year. RNZ understands staff have been told all daily newspapers will become compact in a move to make them easier to use and more visually appealing. The newspapers affected will include the Manawatu Standard, the Taranaki Daily News and the Dominion Post. Those are the headlines. Our next news and sport and weather will be at 6.
Which is 28 minutes away. Thanks, Paul. Giles Beckford next, our business editor, but lots of feedback in on national standards. We try when we get feedback to give you a representative sample. People are overwhelmingly delighted to see the back of them. Let's listen to what you've been sending in. Kia ora, John. As a young male early childhood teacher, it seems that Chris Hipkins is making a very sound decision for positively influencing children's assessment and learning. I'm hoping that we will see a shift in the education sector under the new government. This means turning our back on outdated models such as national standards and instead begin to work towards assessment, which is focused on the child's interests. Good riddance. National standards, time to get back to teaching the whole child. Great news. Anna says re-national standards, having had children at primary school before and after the introduction of national standards, I like them. This from the other side. I like the increased standardisation of the reporting and feel there's still a lot of room for further reporting, providing more detailed information. And this person says, delighted to see the end of national standards. I speak as a recently retired junior school leader. Far too much focus and time spent on measuring achievement in core areas versus time spent engaging in creative and enriching learning programs. It was distressing to label junior children, i.e. 5 to 7-year-olds, as not achieving national standards when children's learning progresses differently. Thank you all for your feedback. You can always be in touch on any of the subjects we cover. You can text us on 2101 and you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let's go back to Wellington, where we're joined now by business editor Giles Beckford. Hi, Giles. NZ Oil and Gas taking up the benefits of a big gas discovery.
Well, good evening to you, John. Yes, at the annual meeting today, the Chief Executive, Andrew Jeffries, was talking rather fulsomely and positively about the prospects that might come from a big gas discovery off the east coast of the South Islands. Now, they have a prospect area called the Bark Prospect, and that has some seismic work done on it. It's regarded as one of the better prospects around the world in deepish water. It's about 80 k's off the coast. And the company is actually positive enough to have commissioned an economic impact report on what would be the effect if there was a big commercial gas find there. And they're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars for the local economy, billions of dollars of exports for New Zealand, lots of, thousands of jobs being created both in the construction and then the later operation of the company, of the field. And somewhat counterintuitively, they also suggest that in fact it would be environmentally good because it would mean that gas would replace coal in a lot of South Island industrial plants. Now, I did speak to Andrew Jeffries a little after that meeting today, and I put it to him that it actually sounded pretty much like a remake of Robert Muldoon's Think Big strategy of the late 70s and early 80s. And I suspect there was a bit of a wry smile on his face. He said, well, the difference between then and now was we're talking about private money being invested. He was talking about public money. So it's up in the air. It's big blue ocean sort of vision, but it's clearly, I think, they are eager to try and drill that area if they can, and certainly it looks like that they'll probably find some partners in due course to be able to do that.
Thanks, Charles. Let's change subject entirely, and this is an echo of the big finance company crash that, oh boy, a lot of money was lost in New Zealand during and after the GFC. What's happening now?
Well, we spent a lot of time last week, or various media outlets did, talking about the 30th anniversary of the share market crash of the 80s. But
yeah, 87,
we should think that it was only about a decade ago, in fact a little bit less, that we had an equally cataclysmic financial hit here, and that was all the finance companies that got taken out by the global financial crisis. These are the ones who had lent at pretty high rates to somewhat dubious property developments, and I think the collective worth or collective value of the crashes, and there were 30, 40 companies that went down the gurgler, was around $5 or $6 billion of New Zealanders' investments, and that was for a lot of people that was their retirement savings as well. Well, one of the companies that was involved then was a company called Strategic Finance, and those with long memories will remember that Jock Hobbs, the former head of the late Jock Hobbs, I should say, of the rugby union, was a director of that company for a while. Its receivers have finally decided to draw a line under it. And they've said, look, we've done as much as we can. We've got back as much money as we think we can humanly, feasibly, legally get. And really, it's really just time to say it's over. It's done and dusted. Now, this is a company that lost close to $380 million. And of that, they've recovered around $70 million. So basically 20 cents in the dollar for the people who were invested there. And I suspect that there are still some of the recovery jobs out there being done by receivers trying to claw back losses from companies that were in similar situations. And no doubt at some stage or other, people are just going to say, please, no more. Just let it all go away and let it fade as a rather bad memory in history.
Yeah, it was a bad memory. Nearly a decade on. It's extraordinary. Some of those directors went to jail, of course, which was...
Indeed, they did for somewhat improper accounting procedures, not to mention their lack of fiscal rectitude as directors of the company.
Yeah. What happened on the markets today, Giles?
Well, speaking of rectitude, we're actually back on the rising tide for shares. The top 50 index gaining about 0.7%. That was 59 points. 8144 is the close. It's in spitting distance, literally, of a record high. For the New Zealand dollar, still on the back foot, 68.4 US cents and 89.1 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Thanks very much indeed, Giles. It's Sunday night in Washington, approaching bedtime over there, but there may be a few people not sleeping terribly well there tonight. Among them, perhaps President Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, or the President's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. They're certainly near the top of most lists as the US political establishment and the US media await the first charges arising from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Those charges remain sealed until tomorrow. Once they're unsealed, what then? I asked CNN's legal analyst Michael Zeldin.
What happens next, procedurally, is They unseal the indictment. The arrest warrant is executed, meaning the person is either arrested, handcuffed and taken off, or their lawyer is called and they're given an opportunity to surrender voluntarily. They appear before a magistrate judge who reads to them the charging document, the indictment, and advises them of their rights to counsel and remain silent and the like. And then they set the case down for a time in the future, not too long, where the individual comes back and enters a plea of guilty or not guilty. So that's procedurally what will happen once the indictment is unsealed. With respect to how big is this news, well, it's big because it's an indictment, but the bigness, if you will, of it depends on who's indicted and for what.
I know you're being asked to read the tea leaves, and it's really tough, but you're suggesting that the name in the folder might be Manafort. Is that your sense?
Well, no, I'm not suggesting that it may be Manafort. What I'm suggesting is that if you try to read tea leaves here, what you can remember is that the inquiry as to Manafort and his taxes and his representation of the Ukraine, as well as Flynn and his taxes and representation of Turkey, were cases that sort of began before Mueller took over as special counsel. So those cases were further along in the pipeline. And so one can speculate that because they were further along in the pipeline, they may be the first logical cases to reach the indictment stage. But that's all one can do. It might be completely different than that, but that's how people have come to think about Manafort and Flynn as possible first candidates for indictment. The fact that they've indicted somebody is a significant indication to everybody who is in the ecosystem of this investigation, be on notice that Mueller is a serious fellow who views evidence, and when he sees evidence of criminal wrongdoing, he has no hesitation to indict and charge people for that wrongdoing. So if anyone had the misimpression that this was not a serious investigation, then I think an indictment proves otherwise.
You worked as a special assistant to him. This is extraordinary, when he was director of the FBI. And I worked for him. Just sorry to interrupt. I worked for him when he was the Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division of the United States Department of Justice. So that was a job that he held prior to the FBI, and that was the chief criminal prosecutor in the United States. And what's he like? Because I'm looking at Donald Trump's Twitter feed. I'm looking at the pressure on him to resile from actually really hitting home. And I'm thinking, by God, you must be a formidable kind of character. He must be tenacious, and he must be tough, and he must be grounded in something deeply ethical. That's all true. And I think he derives that from his service in the Marines to start. So he was a Marine, I think volunteered for the Marines, and in Vietnam, and then served in law enforcement ever since. So he is a self-contained, serious prosecutor. And I don't think that for a moment the political barbs that may be thrown at him, whether it be from the president or from Capitol Hill, matter to him one whit. He is a self-contained, serious prosecutor who is up against the President of the United States. Now, that's simplistic of me and almost a little bit glib, but the pressure being applied from the White House is quite extraordinary, isn't it? Yes, but not vastly different than what we saw, for example, when President Clinton was under the scrutiny of a special counsel, or when even Ronald Reagan was under the scrutiny of a special counsel in the Iran-Contra case. So when there's an allegation of wrongdoing that reaches the Oval Office and a special prosecutor is appointed, then everybody sits up straight in their chairs because it's a serious matter and no one can take it lightly. It's CNN's legal analyst Michael Zeldin. Would you like some surveillance with your burger? The Council for Civil Liberties says it's disturbing that a McDonald's branch in Christchurch is direct streaming its CCTV footage to the city's police. Katie Gossett reports that while some locals are concerned, others are happy to be filmed in the name of safety.
Signs at McDonald's Sydenham outlet explain that live pictures are streamed to the police control centre 24 hours a day. A spokesperson for the Council for Civil Liberties, Thomas Beagle, says it's the first he's heard of a private business providing this sort of footage to police.
I am concerned about it. I'm concerned that we're all signing up for society and maybe we don't actually want to. Maybe we don't actually want that much footage. Maybe we don't want everything being seen and monitored by the police.
Mr Beagle believes this is a step up in surveillance in New Zealand.
I guess I see there's a big difference between something unfortunate happens and that footage is then made available to the police and actually just streaming all footage there where it can be used for things like facial recognition. Of course, it can be used for automated number plate recognition as well. It just seems a whole new level of surveillance.
A spokesperson for McDonald's says the company was approached 2 years ago as part of a police campaign to use business footage to widen their coverage. It says the initiative is not specific to McDonald's and is a police matter. In a statement, Christchurch Police Inspector Tony Hill confirmed that a number of businesses share footage with them for crime prevention purposes.
We acknowledge that people may feel apprehensive about this. However, the purpose is to make sure that our community is as safe as it can possibly be, and so people feel safe when they're out in public.
And Inspector Hill says the cameras have proven to be effective in deterring crime.
CCTV cameras assist police with crime prevention, and police regularly use footage from the cameras to assist with investigations and for evidential purposes in court. This helps police hold offenders to account for their actions, and it gives us and other agencies an opportunity to help address what's motivating people to offend.
Some Christchurch people spoken to by RNZ News were concerned about the footage being sent to police.
No, I don't think that's good at all. Is that not like doing your privacy or something? I don't know, you could be doing anything while you're sitting in the drive-through. What, say you were picking your nose? You don't want everyone to see that, do you?
It seems a little bit OTT. I'm more worried about my wife spying me at McDonald's than the police.
I certainly would park the car and go in instead, I can tell you that much. Maybe it's time to change to Kentucky.
But others believe the cameras helped keep the area and its workers safe.
That wouldn't bother me, and it wouldn't stop me from going there, but some people would probably get upset about it.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
For, someone getting caught doing inappropriate things, I think that's fair enough.
No, I'm just fine with it. That's all good to me.
The police won't say which other businesses are sharing their footage for operational reasons. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Katie Gossett.
The SPCA has today released a list of the 10 most shameful cases of animal abuse they've seen this year. Now, a warning, as the SPCA CEO Andrea Midgen told me, the details of this cruelty and the penalties that accompany the abuse are disturbing.
So many of them are absolute cruelty. They're not just someone neglecting or perhaps being ignorant about something. They're actually done some acts that amount to cruelty, and, chopping off a cat's ears, leaving a dog tied up with no food or water, leaving a dog tied up so that it ends up with a huge collar wound, and then hiding it from the children knowing that it actually wasn't right. I mean, these are just acts of people that just don't have a conscience.
Yes. I mean, the cutting off the cat's ears, it does look like scissors were used to simply remove the tips of Pippi's ears. I mean, that's the act of a psychopath, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's the most disturbing thing about this year's list of shame, is that there seems to be more cases of that kind of cruelty than what we've seen in the past.
So previously you were seeing neglect that was exacerbated and neglect was added, and the animals were treated cruelly by omission almost?
Yes, yeah. Whether it's just through ignorance and not understanding about animals. This whole concept of animals as sentient beings is still not fully understood across New Zealand.
Opal, who was really ill-treated very badly, but was just basically left and neglected, and just his owner clearly didn't give a damn about him. That only got 3 months imprisonment, and of the 10 cases, I think 3 of the owners or the people responsible for the cruelty were sent to prison. This is increasingly being used by judges, isn't it?
It is, and it's good in one way. My concern is that just going to prison doesn't necessarily change behaviour, and what we're trying to promote more is that we get some more psychological assessment, psychiatry assessments, what have you done for these people, and support, because often there's mental illness involved in these acts of cruelty.
Yes, the guinea pigs and the rabbits, just appalling. I mean, they were left to live in their own feces, they weren't being fed, there was no water, there was overcrowding. Now, that person was disqualified for owning animals for 20 years. And that is salutary at every level, isn't it? Because it reminds us that owning animals comes with responsibility.
Absolutely, and we were thrilled with that outcome because, again, getting people disqualified from owning animals is still quite difficult for us to do, and judges are only just looking at previous cases and starting to use that as a tool. But obviously, if someone actually doesn't know how to take care of an animal, just going to prison or doing some community hours is not going to change that. Yeah, I'm looking at Brownie. This is an appalling case. The man attempted to kill Brownie by hitting her on the head 3 times with a hammer. Even though he knew she was badly injured, he chained Brownie up in a small area by the side of his garage with no adequate food, shelter, water. He later left her there until the SPCA was alerted 2 days later. He was sentenced to 9 months imprisonment and disqualified for owning dogs for 10 years. On the face of it, trying to beat a dog to death with a hammer, is 9 months enough? No, it's never enough. It's never enough. And the other thing that really concerns us is what else is going on in that environment, that family, whatever, because often, as you know, animal abuse is also indicative of further abuse in other areas of their lives. Yes, it is a predictor, isn't it? Well, it's certainly said that it is. Do you believe it is? Yeah, absolutely. There's research that's proven it time and time again. The other thing, Andrew, is if I look at these cases, there are dogs chained up in the backyard. Look, dogs, when they're unhappy, let you know, don't they? So is it fair to assume or conclude that in some cases neighbours must have known that there was a howling, barking, miserable dog next door to them and not have done anything about it? Yeah, I think it is fair to assume that, but I also think on the positive side that we have had an increased number of complaints over the last year, and I think this is because people are understanding now that it's not acceptable and it's not right, and when they hear things or see things, they're calling us, which I think is really fantastic. So if your neighbour is a person who owns a dog that is being mistreated, you can call the SPCA and tip you off without the neighbour knowing that that's happened? Absolutely. Well, of course, we'll treat it confidentially. Are things improving? Do you think we are getting better generally at caring for our pets? I think we are getting worse at the moment. People are still realising what is involved in being a responsible pet owner, but I think there's more awareness. So I think we're on the downhill slide to actually change the norm for our community and behaviours. That's a good thing. Better late than never, I suspect. Can you give us a reminder to end the interview with what is involved in being a responsible pet owner? It's quite simple. You know, you have to provide food, water, shelter, exercise and enrichment. They love lots of cuddles and being part of that family. And ideally, if you can't do all of that, you don't own a pet. Absolutely. Make good choices in your life. SPCA CEO Andrea Midgen. The British Prime Minister Theresa May is facing a growing sexual harassment scandal in the heart of Westminster. She's ordered an investigation into a report that one of her ministers asked a female secretary to buy sex toys for him in 2010. This report from the ABC.
Mark Garnier is a junior international trade minister here in Britain, and he's told the Mail on Sunday that he'll take its report on the chin, that he did indeed ask a female secretary to buy sex toys for him, and he'd also called her sugar tits. But he says it was part of an amusing conversation about a television show and that the sex toys were good-humoured hijinks. None of it was sexual harassment, he says. But no one was laughing at number 10. Theresa May has asked the Speaker of the House for advice on improving the culture at Westminster. And her Health Minister Jeremy Hunt is adamant this latest revelation will be taken seriously.
Well, I mean, these stories, if they're true, are obviously totally unacceptable, and the Cabinet Office will be conducting an investigation as to whether there's been a breach of the ministerial code in this particular case. But as you know, the facts are disputed.
But high-profile Tory MP Anna Soubry says women have been trying for years to get action.
My Chief Whip, and certainly the previous Deputy Chief Whip, Anne Milton, very much shared that view and have shared that view for some time, but found it difficult to get all the agreement that was necessary. But I know what they think. Anyway, we are where we are, and we are now making that progress.
And there have been several other stories adding to the weight of this scandal. It was revealed a group of women at Westminster used a WhatsApp private messaging system to warn each other about who might have been a predator. And Tory Minister Michael Gove was forced to apologise for what he called clumsy humour after this joke about appearing on BBC Radio.
Sometimes I think that coming into the studio with you, John, is a bit like going into Harvey Weinstein's bedroom.
Tell you what,
wait a minute.
You've got something else to say there, Michael.
John goes way past groping.
No.
Way past groping.
You just pray that you emerge with your dignity intact.
Labour frontbencher Diane Abbott.
I heard it and I didn't think it was funny. You know, particularly in Parliament, making sexual harassment a joke is one of the reasons it's not been dealt with. We've got to realise that it's undermining and demeaning for women and undermines and demeans the institution.
There are no political dividing lines in this scandal. Both sides have been damned by allegations.
It's the ABC's Lisa Miller in London. Let's turn to sport or masochism. This is Harry Bernard. He was running in the marathon yesterday. A wee way into it, he ditched his shoes and finished it barefoot. He still managed a personal best of 2 hours 53. Remarkably, had a knee injury as well. I spoke with Harry this afternoon as his dad drove him back to Wellington, and I asked him to describe the state of his feet.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's all pretty roughed up at the moment. There's a few cuts around the back of the heels and the top of the arches around there, and a few blood blisters on the toes as well. It's sort of like pockets of blood that are sort of built up.
Do they hurt?
Not so much at the moment. It's kind of numb at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I can walk on its side now, so.
So you're running along and your knee's starting to play up, right?
Yeah.
And what makes you think, I know, my knee's playing up, I'll take my shoes off and keep running? What made you think that?
I'm not really thinking straight during a marathon, am I?
No. Although, for a wee while, it worked all right, did it?
It did, actually, yeah. It was sort of just took the load off and, yeah. Maybe it was because I was slowing down a little bit, but...
And at what stage did you think, oh, no, that was a mistake?
Probably around 27, 32K, around that sort of stretch there. So when I was turning back.
And so where in the race were you then?
So I was right at the end of Mission Bay.
Yeah, it's it's a long way back into town, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
10K or so.
And so you must actually be a tenacious young man, because I think a lot of people in the circumstances would have given up, because you were hoping for 2:30, right? And actually you were never, once your knee started playing up, you were never going to get there. Why did you keep going?
Oh, well, I just came out here to finish it anyways. I mean, I thought I gave myself a goal of finishing the race and, see how far I could get through it.
And tell me what you did with your shoes.
Well, at about 20-odd K, I took them off and then gave them to a spectator. And she dropped them off at the info desk at the end, and I ran and picked them up afterwards. So
you got them back?
Yeah, I was pretty lucky, actually. I thought they were a goner.
And you've done a bit of barefoot running, but mostly on grass, right?
Yeah, mostly on grass. Sometimes on the road, but very rarely.
Quite a remarkable thing. What was your time?
2:53.
And you did basically half of it in bare feet?
Yeah.
God, you're a tough little bugger, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Do you think you would have finished it if you'd done the whole thing in your shoes?
Yeah, I think I would have finished it either way. It was just a question of time, really, and yeah.
And so what difference, why did you take your shoes off? Was it just the weight?
Yeah, partly the weight. I don't know, there are a few lumps in my shoes. They're a bit old at the moment, so there are a few holes coming on the sides, and yeah, I just thought it'll be better off.
So Harry, you came up to Auckland to run the marathon with holes in your shoes?
Yeah.
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 You don't have much respect for your feet, do you?
No, not really, apparently not.
And so what's your rest cure? You've got to keep off your feet for a few weeks, do you?
Yeah, off my feet, rest up. It's mainly the muscles that are hurting at the moment, yeah.
Ooh.
The feet are sort of getting back to normal, so I can sort of put a bit of weight on them.
Are you going to do another marathon?
Yep. Maybe not next year, maybe the year after, we'll see.
And you still want to crack 2:30, you still want to make 2:30?
Yeah, so next time I'll prepare to have some proper shoes.
That's Harry Bernard, who did the 24K of the marathon in bare feet. The noise you heard was the car. His dad drove him up to Auckland from Wellington and then drove him back. Parents who drive their children to sport, that is above and beyond Auckland return.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Kia ora, good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The new government is expected to scrap current plans to send a robot into Pike River mine as it presses ahead with manned re-entry. The previous National-led government had said getting people into the mine was too dangerous. But the new minister responsible for re-entry says it's entirely possible. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Solid Energy, which owns Pike River, was directed by the national government to enter the mine using a remote-controlled vehicle, which is on track to be sent in by Christmas. But the new minister responsible for re-entry, Andrew Little, says he's discovered the robot is only a prototype, and he's uncomfortable with how experimental the project is. Mr Little says he'll make a final decision by the end of this week whether to scrap the robot entry. The remains of 29 men killed almost 7 years ago are still in the mine. From Parliament, May Heron.
Officials have rejected a recommendation to check out South Island high-rises despite a North Island survey showing mass non-compliance with some earthquake standards. A survey of 41 floors and a random sample of Auckland and Wellington high-rises found nearly all the seismic restraints of non-structural parts of the floors were substandard. This includes how ceilings are suspended and how fire sprinklers and pipes and office partition walls are secured. The engineering firm that did the survey recommended it be expanded to look at 20 floors and 10 Christchurch high-rises and 20 floors elsewhere in the South Island. But the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment says it won't do that because it now has enough information to understand the regulatory issues around how non-structural elements are installed. The Ministry is commissioning updates of its standards. The Canterbury District Health Board says bad debts are rising and it hopes to receive some compensation from the government. Unpaid hospital bills by some tourists and workers ineligible for free care have cost the DHB $5 million over the past 5 years. That's far less than similar costs faced by Auckland's Counties Manukau DHB, but it gets a top-up. The Canterbury DHB Finance and Corporate Services Manager Justine White says she hopes Canterbury will get similar help soon.
There is an additional payment that is given to a few DHBs to cover the level of bad debts. There's about $5.5 million in the 16-17 population-based funding formula allocations that were to do with bad debts, but Canterbury isn't one of the DHBs that receives that.
Justine White. She says the ministry will review the situation next year. Counties Manukau DHB wrote off $5 million in non-resident debt last year, receiving $3.5 million in compensation. School teachers and principals say they will keep using the national standards in reading, writing and maths until they are officially told to stop. The new government is expected to abolish the standards, which have been compulsory since 2010. Here's our education correspondent John Gerritsen.
The end of the national standards is not yet official, but teachers and principals told RNZ News they are looking forward to their demise. They say the system is too narrowly focused and has not helped raise achievement among children from Māori, Pacifica and low-income families. Principals told RNZ News they'll report on children's progress against the curriculum but not the standards. The School Trustees Association says some trustees will not be familiar with any system other than the standards and might need help adjusting to a change. This is John Gerritsen.
3 intellectually disabled men who claim they had been mistreated while held in health board care have lost their High Court bid for compensation. One of them had been detained since 1999, another since 2002, and the third was held between 2001 and 2014. Their lawyer, Tony Ellis, told the High Court last year the men had been subject to unnecessary restraints, unnecessary medication and unreasonable solitary confinement. But in a decision released today, the High Court has ruled there was no evidence that restraint and seclusion had been used in circumstances other than where the men presented an immediate risk to themselves or others. It has also ruled the men's detention did not discriminate against them on the ground of their intellectual disability. The police are searching for an armed man who robbed a security guard transporting cash to his van in Auckland. They say the robbery in Glenmore Place, Glen Eden, took place just before 3 this afternoon. A man carrying a gun approached the guard and demanded cash before fleeing with an undisclosed amount. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Sport now. The veteran Black Caps batsman player Ross Taylor has been given the chance to resurrect his T20 career with a late call-up for the 3-match series against India. Taylor played in the one-day series against India, which the home side won 2-1, but he wasn't due to play in the upcoming T20 series. He hasn't played a T20 game for the Black Caps since March last year, but comes in for the injured Canterbury player Todd Astle. Meanwhile, the West Indies cricketer Chris Gayle has won his defamation case against Fairfax Media, which publicised articles claiming he exposed himself to a female masseuse in Sydney 2 years ago. The masseuse stood by the allegations in her evidence to the court, but Gayle insisted it never happened, and teammate Dwayne Smith, who was also in the change room, denied the incident took place. The New Zealand Formula One driver Brendan Hartley remains upbeat despite an engine failure ending his race early. At the Mexican Grand Prix, Hartley worked his way up from 17th on the starting grid to 11th before being forced to pull his Toro Rosso car off the track midway through the race with smoke pouring from it. Clay Wilson reports.
The Palmerston North driver admits he was disappointed not to finish, but says he's still smiling as he's made progress since his debut last weekend at the US Grand Prix, where he finished 13th. Hartley says he was enjoying the battles as he worked his way up the pack in Mexico and hopes he'll have better luck at the final 2 events of the Formula One season in Sao Paulo and Abu Dhabi. Britain's Lewis Hamilton won his 4th Formula One World Championship despite finishing 9th in the race, but he has such a points lead that his rivals can't catch him. The race was won by Dutchman Max Verstappen. This is Clay Wilson.
And that's the news.
This week on Nights, celebrating the calligraphy of graffiti. The secondary school teacher Ben Robson casts doubt on hopes for a brave new world of technology-led learning. Dr. Kiti Somalingand explains the tool she's developed to help you work out if switching to solar power makes economic sense to you. And there's a sonic tonic dedicated to plotting, just in time for Guy Fawkes. On Nights this week with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast. This is from Met Service. It takes us through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday. For Northland to Waitomo, that includes Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumarunui. Cloudy periods with isolated showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from a few showers, mainly about the ranges. Taranaki and Taihape through to Wellington and Wairarapa, and for Marlborough, Nelson and Buller as well. Scattered showers, mainly about the ranges during the afternoons and evenings. Some heavy and possibly thundery. Canterbury and Otago, it should be mainly fine, apart from areas of low cloud or fog morning and evening, especially about the coast. And isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. Thunderstorms are possible as well. North Canterbury tomorrow afternoon and evening. Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, patchy drizzle. That should clear up in the morning and then becoming fine, apart from the odd shower about Westland. Southland, mostly fine, isolated showers inland tomorrow. It'll be a fine day tomorrow at the Chatham Islands. It's nearly 8 minutes past 6.
Thank you, Paul Brennan. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. We began the program with this tonight. We've been trying very hard to get a response from Southern Response. This is the class action by a group of Southern Response policyholders. It can go ahead after the Court of Appeal rejected an attempt by the government-owned insurer to throw it out. All of this has happened this afternoon. Southern Response was set up following the February 2011 quake when failed insurer AMI said it didn't have enough money to cover its liability. In Christchurch, the company argued the class action claimants had outlined a common issue and the class action hadn't outlined a common issue. So a group of Southern Response claimants tried to take a class action. Southern Response said, no, it ain't a class action. It's disparate claims joined together for convenience. The Court of Appeal has overruled that and said effectively the class action can proceed. But the decision released this afternoon says the remaining 26 policyholders whose claims still haven't been settled can go ahead. Southern Response declined again to be interviewed. We find it very, very, very difficult to get a response from Southern Response. We've got to talk to people really hard for a branch of the government. I don't know why they make it so hard. We've got a response from them, an emailed response. A spokesperson for Southern Response, who incredibly is not named, said there are a number of issues that the Court of Appeal decision covers which Southern Response needs to work its way through as it considers its options. They declined to be interviewed. The new Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Wood, said she needs time to review the decision before speaking. The lawyer leading the class action is Grant Cameron. He joins us now live on the phone. How are you, Grant?
Very good, thank you, John.
You keep winning the right to take what is effectively class actions in Christchurch, but you have to try incredibly hard to do so. And so you start off, you end up in the High Court, you end up in the Appeal Court. What do you think is going to happen here? Do you think Southern Response are now going to come to the party and deal with your group of claimants?
My personal belief is that it will. I think the Court of Appeal decision is very clear. It accords very much with previous Supreme Court guidance on these issues. And I do think the change of government will have a big effect. Megan Woods is thoroughly familiar with the pain and strain faced by people in Christchurch, and I think they'll be concerned to get this matter resolved.
Why has it taken so long? Why have Southern Response, and also in your Quake Outcasts case, why have the people you have been taking as high as, in one case, the Supreme Court, been so reluctant to deal with the class action? Now, Southern Response in their statement say, hey, we've been dealing with the individual claimants from within the class action. In other words, they are settling just very, very slowly. If they're prepared to deal with individuals, why aren't they prepared to deal with a group?
I think the problem with a group is that ultimately, if you permit the action to go ahead, then patterns of conduct will come out which might be of greater embarrassment to the defendant. And it's always easier with large defendants, or so it's supposed, to drag things out, delay, deny, defend, and hopefully the plaintiff might give up, run out of money and motivation, just simply go away.
Right, because if they settle individually, albeit that the settlements have been protracted to the extent of many years, there is sorts of privacy and silence attached to that. What patterns do you think Southern Response, and this is your supposition, although you're the lawyer taking the case, do you think Southern Response are worried about being revealed?
I think the Court of Appeal has covered these issues pretty well in its judgment, and it's talking about the ability of this group to actually prove the fundamental allegation, and that is that there's been a deliberate strategy by this insurer to minimise policyholders' claims through applying various tactics. And although the defendants sort of argued that that wasn't possible, the Court of Appeals accepted that it would be if policyholders, and enough of them, got up and explained how their cases have been mismanaged. In other words, the pattern of alleged misconduct was then out in the open.
You started with 47 claimants, didn't you?
Yes, that's right.
How many have you got left?
26.
And so the others have all settled as this was proceeding?
Yes, and of course the issue then becomes, well, at some stage people do run out of motivation or their circumstances change. If you have somebody, you suddenly come home one evening and find that your spouse has cancer, then you've got much more important issues to deal with than the issue regarding the insurer. So other factors do come into play, and sometimes that's an advantage to a defendant who's dragging things out.
What's your take on all of this? Gosh, you and I have been discussing this stuff for a very long time now. Southern Response is a branch of the government. It was, of course, part of AMI. And in good faith, the government said, OK, we're not going to leave these people without settlements because AMI is unable to pay. But so that was a really promising beginning. And AMI pointed out, Southern Response pointed out that since the original proposed action has started in April 2015, they've successfully settled 2,945 other claims. But what's your take on their opposition to this class action, which has been really, really hard fought?
Well, I think the general pattern has been that the insurer in this case has been producing figures using its so-called experts that are well below, and in many cases 50% below, what independent experts are telling the policyholders. So if we use a hypothetical example of the $500,000 offer from the insurer to finalise your insurance claim, but the policyholder finds with independent parties that it could be $1 million or more, then the question has to be asked, why should they take the $500,000, particularly when their house is really their life capital, their life equity. So the problem then faced for the poor old policyholder is whether or not they can take a large insurer to court. And the answer is uniformly no. And so the only way forward is to actually band together, cooperate, and bring a class action.
What was your relationship with Jerry Brownlee like? He was on the other side of the Outcasts appeal, wasn't he?
Well, I've always found him a very amicable, happy chappy, but I think he's been terribly obstructive in terms of the decisions that had to be made in this particular matter.
OK, so if he's been terribly instructed, will the new Minister, Megan Woods, be receiving the same instructions, or are you anticipating a change in management?
We would anticipate a change. I think there is a sort of a moot point as to whether officials who are advising the previous government will be of the same mode and mind to advise the new minister in the same fashion. It seems that the last government was pretty focused on the fiscal outcomes rather than what might be properly due to people in terms of their policies. Now, perhaps there was a decision there to be made in terms of taxpayers' interests, but certainly the Labor Party was fully informed of all the issues in terms of Christchurch, and of all people, Megan Woods is probably better informed than most.
Grant Cameron, who is the lawyer taking this class action, it's a really fascinating judgment. You can read it, and it only came out this afternoon, so I haven't read it in full, on the court's website. They run a good website with cases of public interest published there in full. It is available now. So this is Southern Response Earthquake Services Limited versus Southern Response Unresolved Claims Group, who Grant Cameron was representing. All of this happened this afternoon. No one from Southern Response available to appear on the program tonight, although as a rule we do have more luck getting interviews with Elvis. It's 6:16. The Auckland Council's got details of an extra 1,000 menacing dogs a year on, a year on from launching a major drive to register dangerous breeds. Over 1,200 previously unknown dogs were registered during a 10-week amnesty last year. And the council promised to get tough on owners who didn't take up the offer. In the months following, 80 dogs were seized, and the council says they haven't taken their foot off the pedal since. Now, our reporter Tom Furley went on patrol with Animal Control.
Hello, Lily speaking.
Hi Lily, my name's Phil from Auckland Council Animal Management. How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Not bad. So I'm out looking for these dogs. So you last saw them at number 35, is that right?
I don't know if they came from there, but I saw them going on the property.
Yep, cool. So the dogs were out on the main road, yeah?
Yeah, they were. So they were just roaming
With
around.
6 kennels in his van, Phil Greaves arrives at the property in Manurewa on one of the day's many call-outs.
They have full ability to leave the property. Sorry, I'm going back. I'll be getting out. You'll be staying in the vehicle because there's one of them's really anti.
The 2 dogs' registration expired earlier this year, and with one a pit bull classified as a menacing breed, the owners will be fined for having their dogs on the loose, as well as no registration. After paying for registration on the spot, the owners will keep their dogs today.
People that register the dogs and keep them under control, we rarely have any issues with. It might be the odd barking or the dog it may have got out, but we can find it pretty much straight away because it's got its collar on, it's got its tag on, and we can scan for microchip. But there are those that, you know, they're not interested in registering the dogs. The dogs never have a collar. They don't care if the dogs run free. You know, they're the problem dog owners, which create problem dogs.
Pressure to control dogs and raise registrations, particularly menacing breeds, reached a head last year after a number of dog attacks, including one on a 7-year-old boy. In response, the council waived registration costs and offered cheap desexing and microchipping for 10 weeks. Back at base, team leader Alex Rodwell says it's made some areas quieter.
Certainly not the same number of roaming dogs that we used to have, and I think that's because we've desexed these dogs, so it's reduced roaming. I don't know count how many unwanted litters it's stopped, so I mean that's a good thing.
After the amnesty ended in June last year, the council cracked down on owners who didn't take advantage of the offer and seized 80 dogs in the first month. The head of animal management, Nikki Marchant-Ludlow, says that pressure hasn't eased more than a year on.
We are proactively going out and following up on our dogs that are classified as menacing, and I think that you'll probably see that there will be a reported figure in excess of 1,000 dogs that have been increased in menacing since the amnesty.
She says the number of dogs being impounded are lower and dogs are being returned to owners sooner. The government has given the council almost $300,000 towards desexing menacing dogs, with the council now running a Text to Desex campaign. So far, more than 450 dogs are registered in the program, which Ms Marchant-Ludlow hopes will mean safer streets and fewer attacks.
If they know their responsibilities and are compliant and understand their responsibilities, we will over time see a reduction in those numbers. Like I say, with anything, it does take time, and desexing alone is not an automatic fix, but it certainly goes a long way to just raising the profile, the education and understanding responsibilities in terms of keeping pets and people safe.
The council aims to have more than 1,000 menacing dogs desexed over the next year. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Hundreds of thousands of people waving Spanish flags demonstrated in the streets of Barcelona today in the largest show of Spanish unity since Catalonia's independence crisis. At the weekend, the Spanish government imposed direct rule over Catalonia, scrapping its pro-independence regional government and deposing its pro-independence regional leader. Now, he is refusing to recognise Madrid's order, and some are now calling for him to be jailed. Here's the BBC's James Reynolds.
Madrid has sacked the local government, dissolved the regional parliament and installed a new police chief. But on the streets, it's hard to tell that anything has changed. Catalan police officers, showing no signs of tension, still guard the main local government headquarters. And the deposed Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, has announced that he will carry on working. In a televised address delivered from the local government offices in his hometown of Girona, he called for continued peaceful opposition.
My message is that you must be patient, persistent and clear-sighted. This is why, for us, it is very clear that the best way to defend what we have achieved to date is democratic opposition. We will continue to work to build a free country, to guarantee a society that has less injustice, more equality, more solidarity and more fraternity with all the peoples of the world, starting with the peoples of Spain.
Spain's central government declines to say if it might take any further action against Mr. Puigdemont for refusing its orders. The government spokesman is Inigo Méndez de Vigo.
We are going always to react with intelligence and with common sense.
Meaning?
You will see.
Catalonia's pro-Spain movement is emerging from its recent quiet. These are the people who want to stay inside Spain. They make up around half the population of this region, and they insist that they are both Catalan and Spanish. And you're Catalan?
I am Catalan from my grandparents are Catalan, my parents are Catalan, and I'm Catalan and Spaniard, and European.
So you don't want to leave?
I don't want to leave at all.
Catalans are divided in this moment. This is very, very sad.
Can you get back together, the Catalans?
Yes, I would like it very much, because I love Catalonia, I love Spain, and I love Europe. I want to be in Europe.
For years, these people have felt overshadowed and overridden by pro-independence campaigners.
they now see this as their chance to change the balance of power in Catalonia. This crowd celebrates the government's sacking of Catalonia's pro-independence authorities. For the first time in 4 decades, this region is being ruled directly by Madrid. What do you think about the measures the Spanish government has taken?
I think we have to take this measure. We don't want to arrive to this situation, but I think we have no option.
I'm Catalan, 100% Catalan. I live in Madrid, and I came just to demonstrate and to please keep together with Spain.
Jail to Carles Puigdemont, the sacked Catalan leader, the crowd chants. The arguments run deeply throughout Catalonia. But right now, a single view appears to unite all sides. No one should resort to violence.
James Reynolds, the BBC's James Reynolds from Barcelona. Lots of feedback coming in on all sorts of things. Let's have a couple of texts. Now, Ree McDonald's CCTV story. Most of the people interviewed on the street, this is in Christchurch with the Sydenham branches, live streaming at CCTV back to the police station. Most of the people interviewed on the street missed the point. Most crime-fighting benefits espoused by the police can also be achieved by regular means. Crime occurs, shop owner submits footage to police. Live footage adds very little benefit, says Ash from Kelburn. Thank you, Ash. And Chris from Mangawhai, which is a rather glorious place, an hour and a half or so up the east coast from Auckland, says, "Hi, John, keep the cameras. The customers might be eating Aussie beef." I don't think that's what the cameras are there for. Thank you, though, Chris, and thank you for all your feedback. Quite a bit on Tracy Martin coming in too. We'll have some of that coming up. But let's cross the ditch to Australia, where former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce is back on the campaign trail after he was disqualified from Parliament on Friday. The Australian High Court ruling disqualified Mr Joyce and 4 other politicians on dual citizenship grounds. Now, the National Party MP, that's National Party Australia, of course, who renounced New Zealand citizenship in August, is also a linchpin of the coalition government, and a by-election is now underway in his New England seat. He is strongly favoured to hold it, but nonetheless, this is an embarrassment and an inconvenience for all concerned. The ABC's political reporter, Tom Eagleton, tagged along on the campaign trail.
Can I get a T-bone steak, medium rare?
At the Bendemeer Hotel, the High Court is not exactly flavour of the month these days.
If you see the judge, kick him up the arse. Yeah, well, I can't really do that to a High Court judge. I don't give the stuff.
Like most here, local voter Ray Davey thinks Barnaby Joyce has been hard done by and is telling him so in person.
You were born in bloody Tamworth, Base Hospital. I know. That should be enough.
Bendemeer, population 300, is Barnaby Joyce heartland. His strongest supporters are in small towns just like this. It's the perfect campaign stop. Trevor Hazelwood's the father of the village's most famous export, fast bowler Josh Hazelwood.
I was just telling these fellas, I said, Josh Hazelwood's from Campbell. No, he's not. He's from Bendemeer. Exactly. I'm glad you said that.
Trevor Hazelwood's a Joyce supporter, but he sounds like he could be tempted away.
What would you give One Nation's chances for around here?
I don't mind her actually. I like the way she speaks. Sometimes he speaks a lot of rubbish, but she calls a spade, and that's what I sort of like about Barnaby.
Next, Mr Joyce decides to drop in on his parents, Jim and Murray, who still live on the farm he grew up on. AM joins him on the drive along a twisting dirt road fringed by casuarina trees and cattle grazing on steep hillsides.
What was it like growing up here?
Windy, dusty, and very, very, very hilly.
93-year-old Jim was born in New Zealand, which ultimately led to Barnaby Joyce's disqualification from Parliament.
Hi, Mum, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Barnaby, and you.
I'm great.
The family asks that the tape recorder be turned off while they chat, but safe to say Jim and Murray also have a low opinion of the High Court.
They feel sort of partially responsible for it, but of course it's none of their fault. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, they're still sort of relitigating it, and I just keep on saying to them, it's too late. We lost 7-0. It's over.
And Mr Joyce doesn't sound ruffled by a potential threat from One Nation.
Do you need a run for your money?
I don't care. I mean, I always work hard regardless, because the big thing that drives me is not the other candidate. It's how people down the street see you and how people at the sale yard see you. It's,
how much, though, will the coalition put into this campaign if there isn't a viable competition?
I always put stuff into it.
And he's relishing the chance to skip the final 2 weeks of Parliament for the year. It'll sit while he's still campaigning.
It'll be an absolute circus, so I'm actually quite happy being here.
You don't want to be part of the same-sex marriage debate after the plebiscite's done?
I feel that I've been part of that debate for about 4 or 5 years. I am sick of it.
And he's promising his parents they'll be seeing more of him over the next few weeks.
You will, Mum, because I've got nothing else. Cool. I've got nothing else much on.
Right.
Anyway, okay, bye, Mum.
Bye-bye, Barnaby. All the very best.
All the very best. Yeah. That was Barnaby Joyce's mum, Marie, ending that report with a very restrained farewell to her son. The report was from Tom Eagleton from the ABC. Lovely piece of observational reporting. Lots of feedback on national standards, and as we said earlier, overwhelmingly people are pleased to see the back of them. In fact, delighted, this listener says, delighted to see the end of national standards. I speak as a recently retired junior school teacher. Far too much focus and time spent on measuring achievement in core areas versus time spent engaging in creative and enriching learning programs. It was distressing to label junior children, i.e. 5 to 7-year-olds, as not achieving national standards when children's learning progresses differently. Actually, I did read that one out before, but that really is a very strong representative sample of the kind of feedback we've been getting. Without national standards, how will they gauge the level of special needs and supports for it, this listener asks. The problem was they didn't resource the schools, so my severely dyslexic son had to be funded out of school budget. Then the government expected my son at standard. Without specialised teaching, that isn't going to happen. Hence why pressure on teacher and child. Sad to see standards go. As I mentioned that without funds, my son will be magically deemed to be learning at his own pace, whatever that means. He is capable of so much more. Emily, you raise really good points about children with dyslexia and other special needs at school, and we will address them. As a teacher, I'm wrapped. It was harsh and time-consuming. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Christchurch police are being accused of exposing people to a new level of surveillance by taking live footage from cameras at a city fast food restaurant. A group of climate-orientated medical professionals want Wellington's trolley buses saved before it's too late. A court has cleared the way for a class earthquake-related action by a group of dissatisfied insurance holders in Christchurch. And Auckland police are searching for an armed man who this afternoon robbed a security guard transporting cash to his van in Auckland. Our next news and weather is at 7.
If you think RNZ has breached formal standards either on air or in our online content, you have the right to make a formal complaint. This must be made in writing to the broadcaster first within 20 working days of the broadcast. To find out about those standards or to lodge a complaint, go to rnz.co.nz and type formal complaint into our search engine and you'll be directed to our formal complaints page.